Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on wherever you're joining us from. I'm Alan from ISWA, and I'm introducing today's webinar on Masterclass EPR, Fees and Modulation. Thank you for connecting with us from all around the world. Over 750 people registered of over 58 countries for this webinar, a truly global webinar. We will be joined today by three experts on EPR who will talk you about the fees for EPR and modulation. You are encouraged to type questions in the questions window to your right. We will be choosing a few of these questions for the speakers to answer at the end. This webinar is a partnership between ISWA and our members EXPRA and PSI. EXPRA was established in 2013. The Extended Producer Responsibility Alliance is the umbrella organization for packaging and packaging waste recovery and recycling systems, which are owned by obliged industry and work on a non-profit basis. PSI is a pioneer in EPR systems in the United States for many products, and their vision is a society in which consumer producers take primary responsibility for the environmental, health, economic, and social impacts of their products. PSI is a convener reaching across boundaries between the public and private sectors. They have hundreds of government members and more than 120 partners as businesses, NGOs, and academics. I'd also like to take a brief moment to introduce ISWA here, as several of you joining today are not yet members. The International Solid Waste Association is a global, independent, and non-profit making association working in the public interest and is the only worldwide association promoting comprehensive and professional waste management and the transition to a circular economy. We are open to individuals and organizations, members from the scientific community, public institutions, and public and private companies from all over the world working in the field of waste management or interest in waste management. ISWA is the only worldwide waste association that enables its members to network with professionals, companies, and institutional representatives. ISWA's mission is to promote and develop sustainable and professional waste management worldwide. We have members from over 100 countries. We count on the support of our members, so if you are not yet a member, please take a moment to visit our membership page by visiting the link on the screen. Or you could also reach out to our membership manager, Mr. Daniel Purchase, by writing to him at dpurchase@iswa.org. We have flexible membership options with discounts for students, low-income countries, and online members. I'd like now to give the floor to Joachim Quoden from EXPRA. I hope you enjoy very much this webinar, and thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, dear Alan, for introducing our today's webinar, and I'm very happy to have the pleasure to moderate the second edition of our webinar series again. I hope that many of you have participated in the first edition, where we discussed, I would say, the basics of extended producer responsibility. Just to recap for those that were not able to attend, EPR is a tool that give producers who are putting a product, who are putting a packaging onto the market, an individual responsibility more than the usual one, putting a good product on the market with some warranty, but in the end, the responsibility is over once the consumer or the final user has purchased the product. So, especially in the field of waste management, extended producer responsibility means that they are responsible to take back and to recycle the products, the packaging they put on the market, and to design them in a way easy to collect, to sort, and to recycle them. As said, this is an individual responsibility, and part of this individual responsibility can be transferred to a collective entity, the so-called producer responsibility organization, which then tries to establish a system, which we also call very often EPR system. This is the classical circle, how a circularity for packaging or for other products should look like, so that you have somehow the producer responsibility organization in the middle, and they are responsible that this circle is turning, and that this circle is turning even in difficult times, like today when the virgin oil prices are very low, so that the recyclers who are selling their recyclates get less money than in the past years. So the need for financial injection might be higher than 1 or 2 years ago. And that's somehow where we're coming to the topic of today. The financial injections, so the payment of the collectors, the payment of the sorters, sometimes the payment of the recyclers as well. Sometimes we get money, sometimes we have to pay, but all of this is leading to an amount of money that we still have to cover. And who is responsible to cover this gap? It is the people who are putting the products or the packaging onto the market. Usually the producers, the fillers, sometimes the retailers as well, depending on the national legislation. And these financial contributions are usually called EPR fees, and this is the topic of today, because it is of course extremely important that these fees are calculated in a fair and transparent way, to have all the obliged companies on board, that no one feels discriminated, and that everybody understands what his payment is used for, that it does not end up in dark spaces or whatever, but is used for the collected purpose. And it is the job of a producer responsibility organization to calculate these fees and to align with those who have to pay the fees. And our great speaker, Derek Stephenson, somehow my mentor for many years, because he was one of the first experts in the field of EPR, even starting in the 80s, to deal with these topics. And I had the pleasure to learn a lot from him. He will explain us how these fees are calculated and aligned with industry. In the last 1 or 2 years, we said just calculating the normal fees for metals, for plastics, and so on is not enough. We have to reward those special packaging that are more easy to recycle than those who are more difficult to recycle. So we have to go 1 or 2 steps more in granularity. And this is now called fee modulation or eco-modulation. And our second speaker, Peter Sundt, will explain us how this fee modulation should work in theory, how it is done at the moment in some countries. Of course, my usual saying, everything is possible, and of course every country has its own approach. Finally, our friend Scott Cassel from PSI will give a short idea what is happening in the US, and will summarize what the two speakers said, so that we have an informed and concentrated discussion with all of you, hopefully. So, thanks a lot. Yes, of course, which is very important, because ISWA is much more than just packaging and just EPR. We are just a small part of the discussion within a sustainable and efficient waste management system at the municipal level. I have the pleasure to chair the ISWA working group governance and legal issues, where we deal with horizontal topics, usually with topics that the other working groups do not want to deal with, or which are too broad for them. One of our key issues was up to now EPR. We worked a lot on a library about EPR. Many people wrote articles from their point of view, and we started this webinar series as well. So if you're a member of ISWA, you are of course invited to join our working group to propose topics that we should discuss and work on. And of course, you are more than welcome to take leadership on such projects. Thanks a lot. And now the floor is to Derek, and I'm very curious to finally understand how these EPR fees are calculated. Thanks to Derek.
Thank you, Joachim. Hello, everyone. So the assignment I have for today is to provide you with a very high-level overview of a conventional EPR fee-setting process to set the stage for Peter, who will talk in more depth about the modulation aspect of it. So let me begin by telling you right up front, here are the key messages, the key understandings I hope you'll take away from this presentation. Setting fees for different types of packaging is already the most complex task that a packaging PRO undertakes. PRO can have perhaps 1,000 members. It can have more than 50,000 members. It can have many more than that in Italy. You have sitting in that organization the full packaging chain, raw material suppliers, converters, fillers, retailers, all the materials, and they're all competitors. And they're there to watch their back, and maybe sometimes to get a little bit of insight to other industry sectors. So it's pre-competition, but it must please a lot of people. And in the end of the day, it's all about the money. So modulated fees, there's always been modulated fees to reflect the different costs to manage them, the characteristics of the packaging, large versus small, multi-material versus single material. But it's widening. It's widening to bring more fairness to producers and to competing materials. And more particularly that EPR as a compliance subject has been overtaken by EPR as a contribution to driving a more circular economy. So because fee modulation is a strategic priority for some of the leading multinational consumer products companies, as well as government policymakers and EPR advocates, because they've come to understand that this issue is a lot more than about recycling and recovery. I think, therefore, it's inevitable that there'll be more modulation of fees, and I'm just going to give you a little glimpse of what I think might be the scope of modulation that might occur. But let's just look quickly at historical overview of how fee setting has been done. I would say that in the beginning, EPR, and again, I'm only speaking today about packaging, not the full range of materials that are now covered in EPR, but it was a compliance mentality. It's a necessary service for which you must pay a fee. And the guiding lights, the guiding minds, the boards of directors wanted to keep things simple and to keep costs low, and in particular to minimize interference in their core business. How they chose to package, how they designed package, what material, that was not their priority. But now the new directions that Joachim has already highlighted for you, given that there's ever more complex packaging, you're seeing poor performing from a recycling recovery point of view, not necessarily from a total environmental impact, but within the context of EPR, buried within these broad material categories called paper, glass, and especially plastics. So there needs to be more detailed differentiation to fairly determine true cost and to set appropriate fees. On top of that, there is this strong drive within business and within government policy and other advocacy to drive reduction, redesign, and better material choices. And while recovery and recycling is important, it won't get you to a circular economy. The two guiding principles for that are resource efficiency and low carbon footprint. So there's more to be done within the space called EPR. It's my view that going forward, fee setting is going to have to support broader policy goals. And because we have an international audience here, it's important that we don't just stay in a European mindset. EPR has been already implemented in many different transitional markets, many markets in South America, Indonesia now, in India, bringing in another 1 billion people into the system. And in many of those countries, perhaps 2% of the population supplements or makes their entire living out of recycling used packaging. And so they need to be addressed within the system, to be incorporated into the system. I also think you'll see a drive for more shaping EPR programs to support national economic development. As China continues its pivot away from, through the Green Sword policy and other ones, of shifting from reliance on imported waste, they are driving domestic recovery and driving domestic uses. And I think other countries will all have to follow that to be able to have secure domestic markets, to be able to manage the material cost effectively. And then decarbonization will become the theme of the next few decades for sure, because climate change is the existential threat that dwarfs everything else. So EPR is interesting, but climate change is the ultimate risk. So how you set fees first depends on the legal context in which you're working. And that's very different on a global basis. There are still very many voluntary industry-led EPR programs. And they're often, and in fact, many of the EPR programs that exist in Canada, in the United States, in Europe, they began as voluntary programs, and usually with one or two reasons. Sometimes industry would do an EPR program, voluntary, to avoid government regulation. Sometimes some producers start voluntary programs to demonstrate the need for regulation. And funding those is really a function of what will the market bear, and can you get a critical number of people to do this on their own without regulation. The focus of my talk today is primarily on monopoly not-for-profit pros, which is the membership of EXPRA, of course. And they require a much more comprehensive legal structure. Pros can be very powerful entities. They continue through major downturns in commodity markets that Joachim highlighted, but they also continue through global financial crisis. They go through pandemics. They are major entities and becoming more major. In violations of some of these requirements about violation of competition law, abuse law, have led to opening of markets, not necessarily by choice of producers, but because there were not the institutional structures in place to ensure fair play. And under competitive pro, there is quite a bit of attractiveness for producers in that there's still a lot of arguments and to be resolved about which approach provides the lowest cost. But there is an attractiveness for some producers who are not really concerned with broader policy goals and circular economy. They just want to discharge their legal obligation in the lowest possible manner. And that's fair. And if the government allows that in the market, what becomes more difficult is to put in institutional structures to bring into play these other modulation that you'll learn a lot more about today from Peter, but that is driving EPR of all kinds, not just packaging, but all kinds of EPR. So let me just say, and apologies to all the representatives I see on this list who actually work and run in PROs. This is fee setting for dummies. Okay, I'm only here to give you the high level, what are the key elements here. In a market, regulations will normally define the obligated material, and that might be done in a very general way, but it's much better to have detailed, legally binding definitions. And it will also tell you which are the eligible sources, or put another way, which of the sources of these packaging materials are producers responsible for? Is it just households? Is it households plus public spaces? Any publicly accessible building? Is it all generators, including all industrial, commercial, institutional? Those vary by market. And sets the minimum recovery targets and the acceptable management options for what you collect. Producers, they have to report in the total quantity of material that they supply into the market. And I say supply, it's not just sold, it's like whether you distribute it for free, it's all forms of what you supply into the market. What's critical here is the differentiation of those types of packaging. While you often see pros reporting out in broad categories, in most cases, they report into a PRO in much more differentiated detail. And that's essential to get proper fee setting and true internalization of costs. A pro also develops an implementation to achieve the program targets and detailed program cost estimates. And while that's a very short sentence on this slide, that's a very big task. That is the heart of the system and almost as complex as the fee setting part. When you have that, you have to determine the material specific fees, and that generally requires, to be successful, it requires guiding principles and strategic objectives be set by the board of directors. What is the purpose and what is the long-term strategy? Is it as simple as get my compliance at the lowest cost, or is there more, is it a broader goal? And we're here to tell you today, we think it's becoming much broader than that. And then it needs to agree a detailed methodology for determining differential costs for managing used packaging. That needs to reflect cost to manage different sizes, formats, composition, and increasing characteristics of the packaging type. Does it add cost to common systems like sorting lines? Does it interfere with the recycling of other material? As you get more complex, this becomes more important, and you must modulate the fees to take that into consideration. And then after that definition of the cost, you have to agree a methodology for allocating those costs across specific materials in a way that's consistent with the principles and the strategic objectives of the corporation. First and foremost, they always want to discharge their legal obligations at the lowest cost, but increasingly to support broader producer and PRR and public policy and strategic goals. We'll touch on those in a minute. So the basic cost, again, highest level, it's to pay service providers for the collection and processing. You do have cases of producer self-compliance, you do have cases of sectoral compliance, but in the main, producers don't go into the waste management business. They hire service providers, municipalities, waste management companies, recyclers, and this is overwhelmingly the majority of the cost in normal conditions. 90% plus is where the money goes. And some of that is unique to the material and some of it is common. Promotion education is essential for improving program recovery rates and reducing contamination, but they never seem to pay enough for that. It's harder for companies that are specialized in marketing to spend material on the end of life, but it is essential. In forward planning for pro, any pro that's not continuously adjusting its methodology for fee setting, if it's not innovating in how you should set fees and how you should handle material, is simply behaving as a compliance organization rather than the change agent, which is what the theory of EPR envisions. That it's not just about compliance, it's about change, and change towards a more circular economy. Enforcement needs to be in play, built into the cost. There was a hope, I think, for many people that government would take on this role, but if you don't, willing to pay the cost, you're at great risk for ensuring you have good enforcement. And then there is a whole number of things that a pro does about registration, fee setting, auditing, on and on and on. That's too much detail for discussion today. So I want to speak about what are a producer's priorities in fee setting. And I have to be clear that I'm generally speaking here about large producers. large producers who have the resources, who have experience. Major multinational consumer products companies are now members of 50 plus, up to 100 organizations, doing roughly the same job, often doing it differently and with different fee setting. So they have a lot of experience, but they can't impose that on a membership that gets down to very small businesses. And their priorities as the largest producers is, first and foremost, protect freedom of packaging choice. You can explain to a producer or a board of directors or the management group that things are very difficult to recycle, that plastic, black plastic can't be read by the optical sorters they paid for in the previous years, that a PVC bottle can disrupt recycling other ones, that a ceramic bottle looks the same to an optical sorter somewhat. And maybe it would be better if you didn't have that. But in my experience, the mentality of the producers and therefore the pros that work for them is find a way to manage it, don't eliminate it. I want the freedom to choose how best to deliver my products to my customers and how to sell my products. They really want fact-based decision. And this is a much abused term in a number of countries represented on this call. But seriously, the methodology has to be science-based, not ideological, not emotive, but science-based. As close as possible, producers want to have a level, commercial level playing field, as close as possible. Most particularly, though, with your direct customers or your direct competitors. So, if you take the example, you will see the expression always about de minimis in a fee setting. De minimis is driven by a couple of things. Sometimes it's the politics, it's a political consideration about the burden you put on small businesses, but it's also about sometimes you can spend more money chasing a producer than you're going to get in fees. And so it's better to not have a perfect one, but a reasonable one. And that brings in the concept of fairness, particularly between the largest businesses, which have a lot of resources and knowledge, and small businesses, which don't know what we're talking about. And so one of the wisest chairs of a board that we presented options to for fee setting methodology summarized it nicely as he told his fellow board members. So it seems to me we can have administrative efficiency or absolute fairness. Please choose one. Increasingly, people are finding more ways to balance that out, but administrative efficiency is often in conflict with fairness. So it needs to be monitored. Producers also are very interested in moderating fee increases. There's many a good experienced EPR senior executive in a PRO who's moved on to other businesses when fee shocks hit the system. And so there are ways to moderate that by such things as calculating value of material on 3-year rolling average, or building up financial reserves and using them to moderate fee increases easier. This is very important for smaller businesses that have trouble passing on these costs. Increasingly, I find that producers want to know what you're talking about more. I would say early days of producer responsibility organizations and fee setting, there were not very many producers who understood actually how it worked and what the impacts were. And that's changing. And that's changing because costs are going up and there are more demands put on the EPR system and by regulation and by the producers themselves. So I'll just summarize by saying what I think the key success factors are in a fee setting process. First and foremost, good governance. You need to have a balanced representation from all sectors. They all have an interest, they all have different margins, they all have different ability to make decisions. It's easy to say the company that put it on the market, but it's a chain of companies that put it on the market. And they need to have input, they need to be represented. In my own experience, it's essential at startup of a PRO. And I think also when you're changing a fee setting methodology, you really need senior management participation. They bring a different strategic vision. They bring a wider perspective than lowest possible cost, and strongly encourage that. Transparency, which you heard already from Joachim, you really have to be able to clearly demonstrate how you set those fees and why. You need good data, particularly on the costs. That's easy to say and hard to do, but you need to get an in-depth understanding of all the costs, the administrative overheads of the suppliers. You need a lot of work in that area. Then you need a detailed, defensible methodology for determining differential material costs to manage. And also, that's driven largely by the characteristics of the material. But then each of them has to contribute a fair share to common program costs, which we outlined before, many common programs. And they may well be different in your fee setting methodology. And then I would say it helps, very helpful, to have a strategic vision that encompasses at least these learnings. That industry self-management of this process offers benefits over tax alternatives or other regulatory options that are available to government. That the material which the EPR program manages, this is not just packaging, this is products as well, this is components. It's ever evolving. In the packaging world, the ever evolving time is going to continue for a very long time, and EPR programs are going to be forever. So I think while EPR is an important step in promoting recovery and recycling, it's a small step towards truly getting to a circular economy. And the purpose of modulating fees further is becoming to focus producers' minds more clearly on the design decisions they have to make at the front end, and to facilitate, to accelerate this transition process that many stakeholders judge is going too slowly. So thank you for the time and attention, and I'm going to now pass the presentation back to the moderator. Thanks.
Yes. Thanks a lot, dear Derek. I saw already a lot of questions popping up. We will try to deal with as many as possible after our presentations, but we can see that there's a lot of tension with the fees, and there's still a lot, I think, what we can talk about. Yeah, as you saw already, setting the normal, boring fees is a quite complex matter. But we have decided minimum in the European Union, but as far as I heard, it's a buzzword now in many countries all over the world. We have to modulate the fees. And the question is, for me, always who should modulate the fees? Should it be the PRO, who has the data and the experience, or do we allow politicians to decide by feelings to double or triple the fees? If they have a bad morning or something. A lot of efforts have been done by several PROs already before the new EU legislation was approved to make the case, to show how fee modulation could be possible. And that's the fantastic job of Peter. And he is dealing with fee modulation, I think, since 3 years, 4 years, as one of the leading experts within the European Union, but I think we just lost him. Something is not working. I hope he will come back again. He organized 2 or 3 workshops with the consultants of the European Commission to make them understand what is fee modulation and what are the consequences for PROs and for industry. Not all of our expertise have been taken up in the work of the consultants of the European Commission. Somehow they used all the information that we gave them to make it even more complex, sitting in their ivory tower in Bristol, UK. But Peter, now the floor is yours. I hope you will stay with us minimum for the next 15 minutes. Thanks a lot, Peter.
Thank you for this kind invitation and introduction. There were some technical issues. Maybe it's because I'm far up north. 6 feet under in my cellar at home. Hope it works. This presentation is based on a joint survey we made among our members. I will talk more about that. So first, a brief introduction. Maybe there are many organizations for you. I will explain who is who. Then we go into a little bit about EPR and principles. Both Derek and Joachim has mentioned something, so something is repetition, but maybe it's good to go through it again. And then some key results from our survey, some examples from some European countries, quite superficial, and then some conclusion remarks. And down to the right here, you can see that, or you can't see it, but this is an illustration from our survey that most members, most producer responsibility organizations, they have already started the eco-modulation. And very many are planning it, and just 12% of all our members around have not started yet. And then when we talked about the fees with Derek, you can call it modulation or eco-modulation. From the very beginning, we modulated the fees based on kilos packaging. And if you use 20 grams or 10 grams, of course, the weight of a packaging is also important for the footprint. So in a way, I would call that eco-modulation as well. This is something about our organization, EPRO, European Association of Plastic Recycling and Recovery Organizations. All members should be based on EPR, producer responsibility. And we started off with the name European. As you can see, we have also members from outside Europe, and that's great. And the idea is to exchange experience and thus optimize national effectiveness through international cooperation. As I started as the leader of the Norwegian system back in '96, I was one person working on this for many owners. And at first I was thinking maybe it's a good idea to talk to the Swedish guys and the German and the Austrians to learn from the others. So that was the start of EPRO, that we found out many countries that we had to have a dialogue and listen and learn from each other. And here are our members around in Europe, very much in the western side of Europe, but we are open for all Europe, of course. In some countries, there is just one member, other dealing with packaging. In some others, we have members also dealing with agriculture, plastic packaging and other agriculture plastics. And there are systems also for commercial packaging. Sometimes in one company, sometimes in different EPR schemes. And EPRO is covering a lot of the world, thanks to Canada, where we have 2 members. One of them are dealing with eco-modulation already. And we might say that Canada is maybe one of the front runners on EPR in the world. We have also a member in South Africa who is very clever on PET bottles with amazing recycling results. And we have agri systems also in New Zealand. Just so you understand the difference between EPRO and EXPRA and the network PROSPA, we are all 3 friends working together, but we have a little bit different hats and different focus. EPRO is unique because we are just dealing with plastics. And we are also including agriculture plastics, and we are open for systems for profit and non-for-profit, and also outside Europe. I think Joachim used the same slide, and it's an EXPRA slide explaining about EPR. As a natural thing for EPR is that we, to reach our very high targets, we want to motivate all our members. Money talks, they say. And we can motivate them to eco-design through eco-modulation fees. So if you have a clear, nice bottle, it goes through the system and will be recycled. If it's colored, if it's some sleeves, if it's multi-layer, then it costs more, and then it's fair to differentiate the costs. But the whole idea is to motivate industry to eco-design, so it's a win-win for everyone and for the environment, of course. This is also a reused slide, and to explain it in a little bit different way, you see the orange arrows indicated that everything is a nice circular economy. But unfortunately, the system is leaking. All systems are leaking a bit. And eco-modulation and better design can help us to reduce the leakage, because then things are sorted out for recycling, and everything can be recycled. Bad design might result in leakages. So the whole system is getting more efficient if everyone do their job and inclusive design for recycling up front. We were also talking about costs, and costs are related to those blue arrows, the contracts and the financing. And maybe 80 to 90% of the cost of the system is related to collection and sorting, external costs. Eco-modulation is also mentioned, and the legal background is in the Waste Framework Directive in the EU, that producers or the member states through our systems shall provide for modulation as an incentive to design products that can contribute to waste prevention and facilitate recycling even better. I just have to mention that in EU, we have EU making directives. At the same time, countries have national legislation, and that might be national legislation for 100 years. And waste management is a typical local activity. So in addition to the nice EU directives, we have national legislation, and we have also local legislation. So waste management is a local and national issue. But now, as we are getting more and more global, we have to accept that we have to operate on different levels. And for eco-modulation, we have to take into account that waste management is something local, and we use local sorting plants, national sorting plants, and recyclers. So it's not easy, or maybe just a dream, that everything can be one system and one price for all Europe, all the world. I think this is also recycled slide from EXPRA and Joachim, that there are some very important principles for eco-modulation that we are talking about the eco-modulation shall reflect the real costs. And we are talking about measurable technical reference here, not just nice to have things, or so everyone can understand what we are, how things are calculated. And all these things should avoid market restriction or distorting the flow of products. At the same time, on the other side, innovation is also important, and we have to be open-minded for innovation of packaging and materials as well. And of course, for all EPR activities, we have to be transparent. And even though it's been mentioned that things are complicated, we have to make things simple. We as human beings, often we do things more complex than necessary. And in this case, we have to try to make it simple, because we might say that eco-modulation is a fantastic weapon. But if we make it too complicated or misuse it, it could be a dangerous weapon. So we shouldn't make it too complicated. So the little survey we made in March included all the EPRO, EXPRA and PSI members. We got 35 answers, and the first conclusion from the survey is that members are very positive to eco-modulation. Nobody is against it. They see this as a good tool. The driver for eco-modulation is mainly regarded as something related to the Waste Framework Directive and legislation, but many countries and systems have eco-modulation in mind in their board as a strategy themselves, or as a requirement from the members. And as I said, half of all these producer responsibility systems, they have this they are in operation already. So just 2 slides from the survey in detail. Of course, there are risks involved, and there are several. Each column represents one area, risk area, we might say. And on the top of each column, it's the gray color. That means they don't know. The pink is the highest risk, and then we have the green, and the blue is the less risk. So if we go to the first one, loss of members is not a high risk as according to this pros. But in the next column, people see unfair competition among pros as a risk. Also, administrative burden. People are a little bit scared that this can lead to a lot of costs. And also, quite high risk is this can lead to conflicts among members. Those who produce yogurt cups from polystyrene against other groups, for instance, that we make it so difficult that it leads to some conflicts. But loss of effectiveness and efficiency, that is so important for all the systems, that is not regarded as a high risk. The second to the right, eco-modulation can be replaced by a tax. Somebody saw a risk here in March. In the meantime, EU has agreed upon a contribution based on not recycled material as part of the financing of the EU. So we can expect national taxes as a result of that. And we can also risk that each country are making different taxes with different messages, also related to eco-modulation. So this is an issue to be discussed. And the last to the right, it's a risk of missing on European harmonization. Come back to that one. And which criteria are chosen for eco-modulation? And on this slide, we talk about eco-modulation related to recycling. There can be different criteria for reuse and other areas, but here you can see that which are the highest ranked criteria: design for recyclability, and also disruptors. That mean additives or composition of the material that can make problems for sorting and recycling. That is very common to include that. Some also include use of recycled material as a criteria. But on the left side you see documented recyclability. And we are not talking about theory here. Very often we are talking about recyclability, that the packaging we are talking about is collected today, it's sorted out for recycling today, and it's recycled today, not theoretically in the far future. In this survey, we asked members to list what they have learned from the process and their recommendation to other pros. And the first lesson was principle first. Don't just start, but discuss the principle first. The other message was that international cooperation is important. Therefore, we have EXPRA, PSI, and EPRO, so we can discuss it and harmonize as best as we can. Transparency is very important. And as that was said already, we have to involve producers and other stakeholders in the process, so we are all going in the same direction. And if we have competition, it could be all messed up with different eco-modulation, so this should not be part of the competition, according to our members. And as I said, it should be based on proven recyclability for a particular packaging in a national infrastructure. There might be some discussion on recycled content. Maybe we can regard that as two different issues, but some countries have that included as well. And then number 8, always trying to find a balance. We need a very good financing system. At the same time, we want to stimulate for changes. And if we charge extra for a sort of packaging, which is not sorted out or recycled as we want today, then this money can be used to solve the problems and improve infrastructure, the systems, and the packaging. And the last one, have in mind, don't over-regulate it and do it too complicated. Just to show you that some countries have started already. For instance, Italy is a front runner here. Learning by doing. This is the updated system they have today, also updated according to increasing costs, but they have split the system into 4 categories. The first one, level A, is commercial industry, and you see the figure 150 euro per ton, which is the low cost for commerce and industry. Level B1 is the packaging with good sorting chain today from households, and then level B2 and level C with more where the system is in progress and not so recyclable in level C. So it's you're going up the stairs here from 150 euro per ton to 546. Quite strong messages to the members with that differentiation. If we go to France, they split the packaging into 7 categories with different prices. But what is special with the French system of CTO is that they have a system with bonus. So if you do something extra here, you can get a bonus, but you can also get some penalties if your packaging is related to material losses in the chain or bad quality. So the French system include a lot of other aspects. Maybe we can call it a special French model compared to other countries who are much more focused just on recyclability. In Germany, you have 8 competing systems. So we might say that in Germany, with 8 competing systems, the government has to be much more involved. So they are working together, all the systems and the government, in order to find a German way, a very German and systematic approach, and looking forward to see how it will work in the future. But this is a signal. If you have competition in a country, it needs a lot of rules and a big system to enhance for fair competition, and also a good system on eco-modulation. Let's go to Sweden. And the Swedish is a pragmatic and simple system, going step by step. Everything is based on a national design guideline. So if you follow the design guideline, you get the low rate for plastic packaging. And if you don't meet the requirement in this simple design guideline, you pay extra. So for the complying packaging, you pay 5 Swedish kroner, divide by 10 and you have the euro, 0.50 euros, and a little bit higher for if you not are complying with the design guideline. So the difference between the high and low is not that big as in Italy, but still a strong message. And also the costs these days are increasing in Sweden, so you can see that the prices now are higher than just some months ago. So, coming to the conclusion, since many are afraid of very complicated system, why not never forget about the objective? We are going for a circular economy and a better environment based on the systems we have and the principle we talked about, but don't forget about a circular economy. That's a win-win for everyone. And eco-modulation will boost design efforts as money talks, and that will improve sorting and recycling results and lead also to higher demand for recycled material from the same producers, the brand owners too. So everyone will contribute to a more efficient system, to the best for nature and for all of us. Number 3 is also a positive news, that we as systems are positive and already active. We are not sitting and waiting, we are proactive. And we are also eager and positive to international cooperation on this issue. And last but not least here, I have to underline, this is a dynamic tool. This is not a global tool forever. We had to update it every year because one packaging from last year that was not recyclable due to technology and better systems, this packaging can be recyclable today or tomorrow. So that's it. Joachim, thank you very much. I hand it over to you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, dear Peter. And please don't forget that eco-modulation, only eco-modulation will not save the planet. Huh? It is one tool amongst many others that can contribute to make packaging more circular. And if you see the current fees and the differences, please have in mind that in the European Union, the fees will go up, I think, dramatically, because we will have to achieve more than the double recycling targets for plastics, for example. With the new measurement point, I think it's even triple or quadruple. So you can imagine how the costs will go up. On top, we will have to contribute as EPR systems to even more topics in the waste management chain. So the differences between packaging which is easier to collect, to sort, and to recycle, and those who are still on a long way to go, I think the difference will be much more dramatic than today. Nevertheless, there is more than packaging, and I'm very happy that Scott will give us a little bit more understanding on the situation in general, and not only on our boring packaging field. Scott, you have the floor for a few minutes, and then we jump into our Q&A, and after the Q&A you will have the pleasure to make the summary of this interesting seminar. Thanks, Scott.
Great, thank you, Joachim, and thank you, ISWA and EXPRA for partnering with PSI on this initiative here. I know that you have great questions. I've seen a lot of wonderful questions come through on the chat. I'm going to speak just for a few minutes about what's going on in the US. I'm not here as an expert on producer fees, as the two previous speakers have spoken, but I did want to outline what's going on in the US and reflect what both Peter and Derek have already talked about. So just a bit here, our organization, the Product Stewardship Institute, we're a national nonprofit. We've been around since 2000 for 20 years, building capacity for product stewardship in the United States. There's many of our expert members on this call right now that are really plowing the ground on EPR as we speak. We have 47 states that are members, hundreds of local governments, and 120 partners from companies, organizations, universities, and international governments. So in the US, we do not have any laws yet on packaging EPR, but I will bet that in the next year we have at least several laws that are passed. We've been working on this for 15 years in the US, but right now we have 119 laws on things like going from left to right, mattresses, fluorescent lamps, medical sharps, paint, batteries, thermostats, electronics, and pharmaceuticals. And that informs our kind of rudimentary understanding of how the fees are set right now. So our experience is based on these other products, and as you see here, paint is a per gallon fee. There's actually different fees on a gallon, on 5 gallons, on a quart. Mattresses is per mattress. So those are fairly simple fees that producers pay into a PRO that they manage to run the system. Thermostats brings it a little bit further in terms of recycling costs with the number of ampules of mercury in those thermostats. And rechargeable batteries is similar in the sense of they charge per chemistry type of the battery, reflective of, again, the recycling cost. Carpet is a more recent amendment to a law in California. There's a differential fee on material, again, reflective of recycling costs. For example, there's a higher fee on polyester carpet, which has a lower market value, thus higher recycling costs once it's captured, versus nylon, for example. Also, it takes into consideration recycled content in that law. So I step back and I say, what are the benefits of EPR legislation and what are the benefits of these fee mechanisms? And Peter and Derek have already spoken about this. First and foremost is the dollars. You need the sustainable funding in order to run a system, which is why voluntary systems don't really work that well. We don't even consider them EPR in the United States. We consider them broader product stewardship. But the money is fueled for infrastructure, which is the top left graphic here, creating more of a collection infrastructure, more convenience for the consumer. It also creates recycling jobs. It creates a supply of material that can then be returned back into the circular economy. But above all, what we're looking to these fees for into the future, as was mentioned, is the DFE. It's to really change the design of these products, to change the problems that we're dealing with right now so we have fewer problems and hopefully eliminate those problems into the future. Our organization put together a seminal document here that you can get EPR for packaging and paper products, as well as a materials fee fact sheet. And based upon our research, we've tried to frame the issue to simplify it. You can tell it's pretty complicated stuff, but you have to start in a simple way. And so it starts with those modulated fees. They're the most basic material fees for EPR systems. And they're based on, as was mentioned, the material itself, the weight of that material, and in many cases, net recycling costs. So you get lower fees, for example, for easy to sort materials with a high market value. And it incentivizes lightweighting. So there's source reduction and also efficient recycling. But what we're moving to is this concept of eco-modulated fees, which is a focus on reducing the minimal environmental impacts. And how we do this is the bonus and credits for putting out materials or packaging that has positive attributes versus those fees which are put on those materials and products and packaging that have negative environmental impacts. And some of the criteria that need to be melded together and agreed on, what Peter and Derek called the principles, about recycled content, about greenhouse gas emissions, resource use like water usage, recyclability, toxics reduction. And in the United States, we've been grappling with this issue of litter, and also to a certain extent, the amount of a package that goes in the garbage, because these are big costs for municipalities for the litter abatement and also litter prevention, as well as the garbage costs as well, and how we can fold these into an eco-modulated fee to encourage greater DFE for the package itself. And of course, the big bucket here of anything disrupting the recycling system, we do want to discourage. All this is leading to, what we've been discussing, I think, here, and what Derek mentioned in the beginning. You have EPR, but it all links to climate change right now, because climate change is the huge externality, a colossal externality. EPR, though, with the 29% paper that are causing these problems, it's not just the polluter that's paying, but we want the producer and the consumers to pay the cost to protect citizens from health and environmental impacts. So we're looking for the protection to prevent any of the problems in the first place. So we're trying to internalize those externalities. So that's a basic overview. I know you have great questions. We're going to hear them now, and I'll hand the baton back to Joachim.
Thanks a lot, dear Scott. I was just trying to screen the great questions that have been asked, and please don't be sad if we are not able to answer to your questions during this webinar. I don't know, of course, what the other speakers will do after the first webinar about EPR. I answered all the questions, and I think that ISWA distributed it to those people who were questioning. But let's start with the interesting questions that you have. We are talking with the fee modulation. We are talking a lot on recyclability. as the main criterion. Perhaps Peter or Derek or Scott, you can elaborate what does common sense at the moment, what does recyclability mean or will mean in the future? One professor with one lab is able to recycle one packaging and is concentrating on recyclability the right way forward. Should we just concentrate on the packaging, or is it not much more sustainable to analyze the packaged product? An often used example is meat, which is packed in multi-material flexible packaging. In the past, with normal packaging, we were able to keep this meat for 5 days in the shelf. Nowadays, with these very complex but high-level packaging, you are able to keep it for 10 days in the shelf and at home. So less food waste. Should this be, or will this be taken into account, or do we have to concentrate, following EU legislation, just on the recyclability stuff? Who wants to answer? Peter, expert.
Thank you. First of all, recyclability. Many people think just about the physical recycling, but we are talking about the whole chain. So if it's not collected, if it's not sorted, that's also important. And if it's recycled and nobody wants the material, that's not enough either. So we are talking about the whole circle. And the example with the meat is, of course, relevant, because packaging is not, we are not using packaging just for recycling. It has another function, as you mentioned, to preserve the food. So this tool, eco-modulation, is a tool for better design, and it shall give a signal. But a very good packaging, a multi-layer packaging for meat, shall not be forbidden or extremely expensive. It's a signal to industry to develop better and better design. But we can't ban the best packaging in the short run for meat. But the whole thing is an incentive to develop better packaging, but not ban a thin multi-layer film around a beef, for instance. So the world is not black and white. Something is good for climate, something is good for other environmental issues. So there are some trade-offs here, and that's how life is.
Yeah, this is something I think we would all like to see recognized in the guidelines that the European Commission is at the moment drafting guidelines how fee modulation should be transposed by the member states to have some kind of harmonization within the 27 member states. And that is why they asked the non-EU member-based consultancy in Bristol to write these guidelines for the European Commission. You can all find this very long report with very interesting and very high sophisticated ideas in the internet, or just send me a mail and I will provide it with you. Then some questions more to Derek, probably around the fees. Some people are asked, please define a bit more what are EPR fees, and what motivates a producer to pay money to a PRO if they have in the end no interest in this business? And what is the relation to those producers who are paying, but where their packaging is either not collected or yet not sorted? So the recycling targets are fulfilled by other packaging, and some producers at the moment might only pay money but do not get at the moment the benefit of their packaging being recycled.
Okay, breaking that down into sections. if you don't have a properly designed regulation, would have a consequence for not meeting your target. That is, you either pick it up yourself, or you have a PR do it for you, or you can't sell that product in the marketplace. Usually it's something very blunt, like you cannot supply that package into the market. So if you try to do this on a voluntary basis, the experience has been you get some leading multinational companies, leading domestic companies, but it's a small portion of the market. So there has to be a legally binding requirement for them to pay these fees, and they're going up, as you said. It would be perverse to have a fee-setting methodology that didn't charge all packaging. Otherwise, the simple way to manage your costs is design unrecyclable packaging so that you wouldn't have to be collected. That's clearly the opposite of what you want to have happen. So as a basic principle, all packaging would have to contribute to the cost of the system. Some people and producers call it a green halo. In order for you to stay in the market, you have to make a financial contribution to the system as a whole, and you must be making progress towards the recycling of that material. Everything is theoretically recyclable, down to the lint in your dryer. But it's what's practically recyclable. If there's a reason why you are not recycling laminated plastic sachets, you can put in technology to separate that and internalize the cost of that, so it's a level playing field for a monomaterial sachet. So in principle, Akar, if I understand correctly, everybody must pay to play, and there must be no ability to avoid cost by being non-recyclable.
Thank you. Thank you. Some other questions were around the effects of EPR fees and now in the future or at the moment fee modulation. Can this is to pay for something really a motivation to better design your packaging? Are some companies really maneuvering around to look for the cheaper solution? I know that at the moment, for whatever reason, political pressure and so on, a lot of companies are changing to paper. They say to paper. If you ask questions, you see that it's a paper packaging laminated with a plastic film inside, because paper alone, unfortunately, is usually not able to have the same properties as plastic. So are there really effects designed for recycling from EPR, and in the future even more from fee modulation? Do you think that companies are really affected, touched by this, if you talk to companies? Peter first.
Let's use Sweden. In Sweden, their experience is that when they said maybe you have to pay a little bit extra for black plastics because it's not sorted out, and the reaction from industry was why? They didn't understand and was not informed that black plastics at the sorting plant was not sorted out. So we might say that the eco-modulation means that we have starting to discuss issues. We have put the sign for recyclability on the table, and now also with some money involved. So we are now in dialogue, and a lot of people were not informed. The design of packaging was made by the design guys, very close to the marketing department and other guys. So now, with this little price signal, we get better discussion, and this leads to debates internally in companies, and they find their way taking these eco-modulated fees into account. So we working inside this, we think all companies are thinking about license fee and recycling all day, but they have some other issues to discuss out there. So eco-modulation of fee has also an impact, just that money talks, and we get more focus on design for recyclability, also by legislation. So we are now closer to get into a circle with eco-modulated fee as an extra little weapon.
Any other comment? Scott, yes.
If I could just jump in, Joachim, I think this is really important because I mean, what we're seeing here in the United States is starting that discussion that Peter is suggesting, and there needs to be really good communication around what it is that we're trying to do, to recognize that there are trade-offs between, say, recyclability and environmental impact. Everything is not, you know, all these criteria are not all in the same direction. And we need to have that discussion amongst the different stakeholders. And they vary around the United States, I have to say. I mean, there's a lot of commonalities, but various states value different things. So the issue of harmonization is a particularly complex one. But the most important thing is that we set up the discussion and we have the clear communication about why these fees are set, what criteria are used, what definitions are being used, and we're able to hear the different voices, because the different voices have different interests, and those need to be accounted for in the discussion.
And one of these debates, Joachim, is that example you mentioned, that since there is some discussion on plastics around and eco-modulation on top of that, some guys find some quick fix solution, pretend that their packaging is made of paper, but is a mix of paper and plastics, and that might harm recycling even more, pretending it looks like paper, but it's a lot of plastics inside, and it harm paper recycling and confuse people. So, but then we discuss that too. So even though we make some noise, hopefully all of us understand everything a little bit better.
Yeah, and we should not forget that there is another tool, another Damocles sword in the European Union, so-called the essential requirements. So every packaging put on the European Union market has to fulfill these requirements. Up to now, they were quite relaxed, to say it, but in the future they are revising it. It should come into legislation next year, and as far as I understand, the real change will be that from 2030, only reusable and easily recyclable packaging can be put on the market. So hopefully the definition of recyclability will be the same as for fee modulation. But of course, this is a Damocles sword for industry. So we have 10 years to make all our packaging really recyclable, and think of a lot of the packaging we are using every day. For let's take the HoReCa business for sugar. Even if it is only paper, are we really collecting these small sugar portions and so on? So if you just watch for one day all the packaging you are using, which of them are collected at the moment, which one of them are at the moment really sorted and recycled. So this is something which is coming up for European industry as well, and of course this will give a big push on top, because what is even more difficult than if you have to pay more money is if you are not able to put your products any longer on the market.
So Joachim, I'd like to build on that a little bit. This point about don't try to do everything within the EPR, particularly in the fee service. It makes no sense. Some things, EPRs, can industry self-manage this? And if you have, you want to internalize the cost of something, if it's a hazardous chemical, maybe it just shouldn't be allowed. Now, producers will not make that decision on their own. That's a government responsibility. If you can identify there's a health threat, a public safety threat, don't modulate it out, force it out. I think Scott's right about what should be included, and that could vary quite a bit. So much of what has been effective in the EU is the size of that market, and you have such influence. In other places, in states in Brazil and the United States and Canada, if you're working at a subnational level, that price point is diluted because you have national pricing policies, you spread the cost over a wide number of things. you won't get the same effect. So I think the evidence is thin that eco-modulation has caused a lot of producers to make specific changes to packaging, but you can see where this is going. It's not a question of whether the approach is wrong, is the price point correct? Have they done the right incentive? And then it's not coincidence that some of the leading consumer products companies in the world are signing on to policies that say, I will supply packaging only that is reusable, recyclable, or compostable. They're going to sit at the table at the PRO and make sure that the fee rates support that. And that those that don't fall into that are going to have to pay higher fees. It is a very big, but it's a moving machine.
Yeah.
And the direction all seems to indicate clearly that you're going to see more modulation than less.
Yeah, I think the approach of industry has changed over the last 10 years. Most of the companies are really interested to have a circular approach in the future, and they understand that this will cost money. So see this CFlex project in the EU for flexible packaging, see the declaration of 24 members of the Consumer Goods Forum that endorse EPR globally as a functioning tool on the way to circularity. I think 10 years ago, both would have been unthinkable.
Yes, and you will find that list of endorsing companies are very often the leading players in the PROs that set fees.
Yes. A final question. A lot of questions were around recycled content. Should recycled content be a criterion for fee modulation? And if yes, how could you verify it? Or is there a way to really verify it? Not only for plastics, we are talking always about all materials, for metals or paper and so on. What do you think?
At least we are working on this verification of recycled content, and it's an initiative from Circular Plastic Alliance in Europe to increase the use of recycled material. And of course, in this initiative, we had to discuss how to measure recycled content. And I think we are in process to find our ways, because there are scrap from production, industrial waste, and so on. So we are talking about post-consumer plastic waste, for instance, but in the waste business, sometimes streams are merged into a factory. So we need some good routines how to measure these issues. But recycled content is good, but of course there are arguments that this is another issue than design for recyclability. So again, when you mix more and more things into eco-modulation, it's getting a little bit more complicated. So I think there are different views what to be included in the eco-modulation of fees.
Yeah.
Joachim, real quickly,
yes.
I can say that recycled content is probably the biggest area of agreement and consensus in the United States that's emerged. California just passed recycled content standard in a legislation. And so this is one of the first criteria that producers, recyclers, governments have agreed on that's needed in order to drive recycling markets. So it can be legislation alone, but it also can be folded in as an eco-modulated fee, or even set as standards within the legislation itself. So we haven't really talked about what are the different mechanisms for making sure that the end game is realized. And it can be done legislation, regulation, policy, stewardship plans through the eco-modulated fees and so forth. But this is an area of big consensus in the United States.
That's good to hear, but I think still a lot to elaborate on. Because I passed the final word, before I pass the final word to you, Scott, just would like to remind you that in 1 month's time, we will have the 3rd edition of our EPR masterclass. Next time about competition, which is of course a very intensive discussed topic as well. Should we have a single service provider, a central scheme, or should we have, like in Poland, 40, 50, or whatever, how many so-called PROs running a system, the systems, and so on? We will have the Secretary General of the German authority on board, the private authority, which is monitoring, steering, and checking the German system. At the moment, I think of 8 or 9 PROs. The 10th is in application, so this is changing day by day, as well as someone who elaborated legally on competition and vertical integration, which is giving another challenge to the EPR system. Hopefully interesting for all of you as well in, I think, 1 month's time. But now the final word is yours, Scott. Thanks a lot.
I feel funny having the final word here, but you know, because I learned from all 3 of you bringing these ideas to the United States. So I want to thank you all for that, and thank ISWA and EXPRA for the opportunity. I mentioned some things filtered in the discussion here, but to finalize, we know that these fees are coming. EPR for packaging is coming to the United States. There's about a dozen states that have bills or are developing them right now for the next session. And these eco-modulated fees really do offer a tool. It's not, again, the silver bullet. It's not going to solve everything. Like Derek said, you might have bans for PFAS or material that you just don't want in products or packaging. But it does offer the opportunity for the discussion to reduce environmental impacts, to get to a place where we're internalizing externalities, and we do need to do that harmonized across jurisdictions. And so the opportunity that we have here is to start that in a global sense of what are the different definitions, what do we mean by each word that we're using, and the tools that we have, sharing the expertise that we have, but also the vision for what these tools can do for us. So thanks very much. And look forward to the next webinar with you, Joachim. Oh, you're on mute.
Thanks, Derek. Thanks, Peter. I'm sure we will continue our collaboration. And thanks a lot to all of you from all over the world. Thanks for getting up very early or staying on very late. So great participation, great questions, and I will try to answer as many of them as possible. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Bye. Bye-bye.